forgot how to do all of this. Damn it. We need to be able to separate the actions of an individual person from the community that they belong to. We need the critical thinking skills to actually talk to people, investigate, ask questions. The human being in front of you could be awful, no matter who they are, where they come from, how tall they are, how much they weigh, what gender they are. But you have to figure that out on an individual basis, and that's hard. And that requires skill that a lot of people aren't willing or even able to acquire. So it's much easier to assign everybody to one label and just kind of toss them out because they don't understand. And it's very privileged. Hey Libbies, and welcome back to my channel. I'm David and you are watching Dismantling Hate. Today, we are going to look at a creator called Melissa Dougherty. It's one of the two. I did self-tanner, so maybe my neck will match my face for once. The description on Melissa's channel reads, you'll find a mixed bag of Jesus, theology, very okay satire, Christian apologetics. I'm stuck on apologetics, we'll move on, and cultural topics from a Christian perspective here on my channel. I'm an ex-new thoughter. Daughter, I had no ex-thoughter. With a little ex-new ager sprinkled in. What does that mean? We're here to learn, I suppose, and a lot of my videos focus on topics related to this as well. My hope is to help Christians thoughtfully know what they believe and why they believe it. We are going to be reacting to a video that is called How Did Gender End Up on a Spectrum? How did gender end up on a spectrum? Like this. I felt very called to this video today because I am the spectrum of gender right now. I feel so good, but this isn't about me. Just kidding. Of course it is. We're on my channel. So the description on the video reads, there's a postmodern ideology that is plowing stop it, through our world that aims to dismantle, fellow dismantlers. That's nice. That's fun to say. Say it, dismantler. Dismantler. Yep. We are sure. Might as well start from the beginning. It's only one sentence in. There's a postmodern ideology that is plowing through our world that aims to dismantle all societal and moral norms. This ideology is responsible for how we have gotten to the point in society where language is rebranded and sex and gender are separate. Well, sex and gender are in fact separate. But I might be getting ahead of myself. Now, there are supposedly unlimited genders. If this isn't disturbing enough, the logical conclusion of this ideology, which really functions like a religion, is that age should be flexible too. Girl, how do you figure out how to make something bold in a YouTube description? Now, Melissa may not know much about sex and gender, but she knows how to make that bold. I've tried to make things bold before. Kylie, look into bold things. Yeah, that age should be flexible too. Kids should have the freedom to choose what age they identify as sexual beings. The ideology says this is good, liberating, and empowering. Now, to be honest, the last 20 seconds there, I disassociated. So we're gonna dive right into this video because I know I'm gonna have a lot to say. So I'm gonna slide over, we're gonna roll the intro, and we're gonna find out how gender ended up on a spectrum. And just like this, look, honey, let's get into it. Let's get into it. Oh, also, if you want to see me paint this face and get into drag, you can watch Dragmas Day 8 on my David They channel. I'm feeling myself a lot extra right now, but I think it's because of the haircut. Oh, did I not blend super well into my hairline? You know, worse things have happened. Worse things are about to happen. Don't make me press play. We signed up for this, didn't we? That's why we're here. Okay.
I do want to springboard to another topic, though, and that's one that kind of grinds my gears a little bit more than...
You know what really grinds my gears? Come on, Peter Griffin.
...anything, and that's queer theory. Because, again, I have kids, and this, in particular, is what I deal with. Not just personally, but also because it's there in front of them. It's in the books. It's at the schools. It's online. It's almost cultish how it's become in that regard. Let's start with you, Neil. First, what is queer theory?
Ooh, I'm so ready to hear what they're going to say about queer. Excuse me. I'm super interested to see where this is going. I don't know who these two people on the outside are, but I'm assuming Melissa is in the middle here because this is her channel. We'll just brace for impact.
And what does it have in common with CRT when it comes to the postmodernism of how it functions? Because they're different. And queer theory, you write about this, you guys mentioned this, that it seems to be a little bit more, I want to say elusive, maybe that's the wrong word, but it seems more postmodern.
Elusive, intrusive, just as long as you stay, you stay. Elusive, okay, yeah, elusive. Okay, I'm sorry. If this is your first video of mine that you're watching, normally I do just this like quirky, funny girl bit for the first like 2 or 3 minutes because I like to give personality. I do. Because I gotta pace myself, right? I can't be too, heavy-handed in the beginning. I have to show that I have a personality first, and then something will push me over the edge of going in and really arguing with what these people are saying. Okay. Back to the elusiveness.
In that regard. So what are your thoughts on that?
This is a great illustration of why you shouldn't just conflate all of these theories, because they have their separate histories, separate origins, separate concerns.
Okay.
And now they have, as we show in the book, they've really come together and coalesced in the last even 10, 15 years under an intersectional framework.
There's a lot of really rich language here, like coalesce. That's nice. Conflate. Framework. There's lots of big words here. Huh. No, I don't think I'm gonna let you. I don't have to say everything I think. Isn't that the truth? I should remember that more. Okay.
Today, if you pick up a modern text on the critical race theory, like Kara Bridges' CRT, A Primer, that book will have whole chapters on gender and sexuality. If you pick up a text on queer theory, it'll have a whole chapter on race. If you pick up a book on disability theory, it'll have chapters on things like post-colonialism.
But that would make sense, though, to me at least, wouldn't it? Would that make sense to you? Because intersectionality is a huge part of those conversations. Intersectionality is such a big piece of that, so I don't know how you could leave that out of talking about any group of people who face discrimination on a systemic and societal basis.
Under this intersectional grid, these are all related topics, and you can't separate them. So that's why we're seeing these all coming sort of as a amorphous mass that we call wokeism. But
or like human rights. I've said this before, and I will say this forever. You can't use the term woke in a derogatory sense without simultaneously attempting to excuse discriminatory behavior. I mean, you've been looking at me for how many minutes here? You know that I would be in favor of critical race theory and queer theory, so you know what side of this conversation that I'm on. And so far, I don't even disagree with this man, but he thinks that's a problem and I don't think that's a problem. And the folks out there who would call people like us woke, right? I'm saying us because I'm only imagining that you would agree with me if you're watching this far. I did recently get a comment of a person saying, I'm not listening to your whining for any more than 3 minutes. And I thought to myself, you know what? 3 minutes is a long time. If you found me whiny and you stayed for 3 minutes, 3 minutes is a long time, is it not? I wasn't even mad at that one. I still got 3 minutes. That's worth something. But yeah, these folks that would disagree with us and call us woke, that's not a bad thing. That's not a bad thing. The way that they're about to describe it will probably sound like a bad thing. But when it actually just comes down to the idea that we believe everybody deserves equal rights, and being gay isn't a choice, and being trans isn't a choice, and existing as queer people out in the world is not indoctrination or an agenda. If anything, this is the indoctrination. They have an agenda. I don't really have an agenda. My agenda is to tear these folks down. Once this conservative grift is over, once people realize that the only way these kinds of folks see success in online spaces is that if everybody hates each other, right? If you're not a queer person and you would look at me and be disgusted and hateful and whatever, they want us to be divided because we're less powerful when we're divided. So if you can just see everybody as just a human being before anything else that's going on, it does not matter anything that is going on. Skin color, appearance, weight, height, ability, things that you can control, things that you can't control. All of these things should not matter when it comes down to treating somebody with respect. And honestly, giving people the benefit of the doubt, it's not that difficult. And giving people the benefit of the doubt, although it sometimes gets you caught up in a situation where you, for lack of a better word, let your ass hang out and it came to bite you, a lot of the times it makes life more livable and enjoyable if you can just assume the best in people. And sometimes the most outrageous behavior is done with the best intentions, probably like them. It's not hard. I do have respect for these people as human beings. And you know what? You can think this and I would still have respect for you. But it really starts to dip down when we're sharing it and trying to get other people to think this way as well, right? Like if you're homophobic and racist, stay with me through this next sentence. If you're homophobic and racist, that's fine, but just don't give it to anybody else. You're sick, and that's okay. Because we all get sick with different things. We do. It's true. Sometimes we don't have a whole lot of control over it. And sometimes you make yourself sicker on purpose. I've been there. Not in that regard, but I've been there otherwise. Food, mostly, anyway. It's in the act of publishing this that I have the issue with it, and that I find at least the middle one so far disgusting. Although I do like her little curls. Those are fun. I love a curl, but you knew that. Let's keep going.
But historically, they did have separate origins. So where did queer theory come from? Really, if the godfather of critical race theory was Derek Bell, the Harvard professor, then the godfather of queer theory would be Michel Foucault, the postmodern French philosopher. And now he did actually write about sexuality, and he was one of many French intellectuals in the 60s who campaigned, this is wild, but they campaigned to abolish age of consent laws. So there would no longer be an age of consent. And that for a while, that was...
Okay, we've come across this before. I don't remember what episode of Dismantling Hate, and this is like episode 80, so you're not gonna find it unless you do, you know. I'm not your boss. Yeah, this is something that's used quite a lot by folks like this, because I do believe that's true. I do think that's true. Or if that particular fact isn't, there is a lot of morally and ethically questionable components to some people's writings on queer theory, especially in a historical context like he's talking about here. That is true. That doesn't mean that every part of that theory is then disgusting and against the law and immoral. We can have the critical thought to discern between the things that we want to take into the future and leave in the past. And abolishing the age of consent, that's something that can be left in the past, because now we know better, we do better, right? We have the research to prove when the prefrontal cortex grows together and all of this information of the age of the majority, which I guess is different. Where I live, it's 18, but then in the US, for example, it's 21. But we can separate the good things from the bad things, you know? We can. And this one philosopher who wrote that, okay, maybe he was just a creep. He's just a weirdo. I could not find that note, so I won't. If that was true, okay, sure, let's write that guy off. But let's not write off everybody who's living and just trying to exist happily in the expression that feels the best for them. Wait just 1 minute there, glasses. We can be smarter than that. And we are. I always wonder if these people actually believe what they're talking about or if they're intentionally spreading. Like, it's not misinformation, it's a misrepresentation of information. Come on, word salad.
A celeb among French intellectuals, including Foucault. And he did write about sexuality. But mainly, he was concerned with how power works within society. And as you remember, that's a common theme among all critical theorists, whether it's critical race theory, critical pedagogy, and queer theory. So they're both concerned with how power operates in subtle ways to stratify society, to produce the oppressors and oppressed. But Foucault was much more deconstructive in his approach. He wanted to undermine things like the very nature of truth, whereas CRT, these are legal theorists. They're not so much concerned with undermining what words mean, but Foucault was. Okay, so he's the godfather. I think Tessa de Laurentiis coined the term queer theory in 1991, I want to say.
But undermining the truth, what was the subtext there? I didn't get a point. Did you get a point? Let me know in the comments if you got a point.
And there are a number of major figures within the gender theory, gender studies, queer theory movement. The number one probably is Judith Butler, who is a currently living professor. I think she's at Berkeley right now. So what are the, again, central ideas of queer theory? The big one is a divorce between sex and gender,
Yes, there is a difference between sex and gender. Shall we talk about it just for a reminder for the room before they butcher it? Gender is your expression, where sex is your chromosomal profile. Next.
It goes back to the second-wave feminists in the 60s, but they would say there's biological sex on the one hand,
yes,
and then gender, which is a different, totally separate category that is about how society treats you.
Well, yes, exactly.
So you have sex, biology, versus gender, a social category that this bucket of male and female.
Yes, he's nailing it.
It's divorced from sex. But then number two, gender is not just a social category, it's an oppressive social category. So men are valorized as strong, independent, leaders, competent, intelligent, rational, whereas women, according to queer theorists and feminists, women are conceptualized as weak, helpless, maybe not very smart, emotional, hysterical, etc.
Do you not believe that? Like, you might not think that. Like, I don't think that. I don't think that women are weak and men are strong of what he just said. But I see that when I leave my house. I see that on TV. We see that in movies, in TV shows, in music, in art, in media, in everything, over and over and over again. Woman's World by Katy Perry. We see this stereotype everywhere. And I know that you have people in your life that think that that's actually true. It's not that queer theory thinks lowly of women and highly of men. It's that they see the way that a lot of people in our world actually earnestly believe that, and they hate that. We hate that. I hate that. I don't think that should be true. I don't want to be treated with more respect when I go out with no makeup on. That's so dumb. That's so dumb. They think that that's not happening and that misogyny doesn't exist. Is that where they're going? Yeah.
So it's an oppressive category. Now, and then
I completely forgot there was another man in glasses here on the end. It's been 4 minutes into this video, but I'm having the best time. Are you having the best time? I love my makeup and I love that it matches what I'm wearing here. Sweet Lord, this is good. Is that makeup or do I just not have hair there? What a great time to tell you to subscribe to my channel if you like this video. Or you can like the video, or in the comments, can you put the nails emoji with like the pink paint? You know the one. Love nails. Love pink. Okay, let's get back to the torture.
Queer theory, and then queer theory goes farther and says there's not just one category called gender. There's actually many categories. There's sex, number one, and there's a spectrum. There's XX, female, and there's XY, male, but then there's also intersex conditions where children are born with indeterminate biology. There's a spectrum. There's a spectrum of gender identity, how you feel. Do you feel like masculine or feminine or somewhere in the middle? There's a spectrum of sexual gender expression.
Like you looking at me right now, where do you think I would land? Do I land so hard on one side or the other, male or female? No, I don't. But I guess it's interesting, though, because then you're also assigning the makeup on my face to femininity and the tone of my voice and my facial hair to masculinity. It is interesting. So I can see where maybe the far right would look at my values, for example, and think that it's contradictory. But speaking about the spectrum, the neuroscience behind gender identity is really, really interesting. I feel like I need to make a video on that because there is in fact a spectrum of the masculine and feminine characterizations of different parts of the brain. It's so cool. I want to go get a SPECT scan done on my brain to see all of that. But it's like 10 grand to do that. So one day I'll get a scan of my brain. It might not be a good result. Maybe it's best not to know. Okay, yes, there are all of these spectrums. This is like a professional development course right now. This is great. This is great. When are they going to say they disagree and how are they going to disagree? That's what we're here for. But their setup is beautiful. Chef's kiss.
So how do you express your felt gender? You could dress in masculine ways.
I love how confused she looks in the middle. We don't even know what her voice sounds like, do we? No, it's just that was so long ago. Okay.
So you could dress in feminine ways. You could dress in androgynous ways. And then there's a sexual orientation. Again, a separate axis. You can be homosexual or heterosexual or bisexual, or pansexual. And this is where you get...
Oh, I've heard about pansexual. It's that cookware. It's that cookware fetish. I don't think I can say that word on YouTube, can I? I don't know how long I've had lipstick on my teeth. Sorry about that.
Actual figures like the gender unicorn that is being used as a teaching tool for kids, where they have a purple unicorn, and they'll have...
What's a gender unicorn? Mama needs to know what the gender unicorn is. Just a moment. Okay, so the gender unicorn. I have seen this before. So somebody just went onto Canva and made a nice graphic. Girl, we got gender identity, gender expression, as sex assigned at birth, physically attracted to, and emotionally attracted to. That's great. What's wrong with that? Nothing's wrong with that. The argument here from many folks in these circles is that if you were to show a graphic like this to a group of impressionable children, which is all of them, but most often conservative folks like this think that if you show a graphic like that to a group of young kids, that they're just all going to become trans on a whim, which, you know, might happen. We've all seen that. We've all read that Robert Munch book where everybody copies everybody and then the one girl shaves her head and then they all shave their, you know, like social and peer pressure are absolutely a thing, but it's not going to last if it's a thing like that. Is it possible for you to be talked into being trans? Absolutely. Humans lack discernment, I think, on the whole, so it is possible. So it's not that you need to be teaching your kids against gender identity. You need to be teaching your kids critical thinking skills. It doesn't have to do with anything about gender. If they have the skills and thought patterns to be able to confront uncomfortable feelings and work through it and use logic, they're not going to have any problem with a graphic like that. To a point, I do understand where they're coming from, that you don't want people to be convinced of something that isn't authentic for them. But that happens all over the world every day, all the time, in every classroom, in every university, in every workplace. It's not specific to gender identity. We need critical thinking skills and discernment, not the erasure of gender identity and expression and all those 5 different spectrums. It's very misplaced.
And they have gender identity is how you think of yourself. You have sex, which is like your genitalia, masculine or feminine. You have your expression, how you act out your gender, and then you have your orientation, and it's the heart, who you're attracted to. These are all completely separate categories.
They're not completely separate. There is a lot of overlap, but they can exist separately. He said that a few times. I don't know why that's important.
Whereas traditionally you have, the male bucket and the female bucket, and the male bucket.
The bucket? What does that mean? The bucket? The male bucket. Where's your male bucket? That's the way he's saying it too. He's all lips.
Determines how your biology and how you think about yourself, how you express your gender, and who you are supposed to marry. And
doesn't that sound so boring, though? It sounds boring to me. And if it's not boring to you, that's great. Awesome. Love it for you, bestie. Mwah. Support you. Ooh. That doesn't mean that everybody's going to be like that. And I feel the same way for me. Dressed up here, stunning woman on the go. Not everybody's going to be interested in watching me or being like me, which is fine. That's great, actually. If everybody was like me, it would be insufferable. But that's also true for everybody, right? The whole point is that we have diversity. If that's how this man exists out in the world, that's great. I should be able to get to know him and enjoy him and be a friend or whatever with him without his limited ideas of others' expression ruining it for the way that he thinks of me just because I have makeup on, you know, or just because I'm feminine, or just because I am queer, right? It's very limited, and it doesn't bring you happiness. Most people in the male bucket are pretty boring in my experience. Not all of them, but most of them. Let's keep going.
Traditionally, in Christian worldview, you have just two categories.
I forgot about religion. That's how they're going to do this. I completely forgot religion was a part of this.
All-encompassing. It determines everything about how you see yourself. Whereas queer theory has now split those in almost an infinite number of categories. And there's a lot more there. I was close with this, and this probably is what is the real haymaker I was told on Twitter.
Haymaker.
And I'm sure it made you really upset, but it's there. Because queer theory is rooted in postmodernism,
okay,
it wants to deconstruct not just gender as a category, but all categories and all norms. It wants to expose how these are all arbitrary. And that would include categories of age.
That might have been written. That probably is in a book somewhere. That's not what queer theory is about now. That's not what people are fighting for in the streets. That's not what queer people are being harassed, assaulted, killed for. That's really gross. I'm sitting here completely frozen because you can't make those the same thing. It's not the same thing. It's not the same thing. And I've grown up and become an adult in a world where I feel that pressure from society of people watching me to a level that is closer than my non-queer counterparts in all kinds of situations. And it's made me hyper aware of all of my interactions with kids. And I'm a teacher, and that polices so much of my engagement with students because I get terrified when kids come in for a hug. For the first few years of my career, maybe, I was terrified when kids would come in for a hug, and especially in an elementary setting, hugs are meaningful to kids. And sometimes people need hugs. And I hate that I grew up in a world where I had to always be thinking of the way that I look to other people in those situations just because I'm a queer person. It's people like this who say things like that that make life harder for queer folks. They're going to continue and say that the erasure of the category of age is disgusting. And I agree. There are laws in place for a reason. Ooh, I'm fired up, kids. I would agree. I agree with Melissa's face in the middle, you know? But that's not what people are protesting for. It's not. Nobody wants that. And if they do want that, they should be in jail. Or no, they shouldn't be in jail. They should be getting help. They should be in actual facilities that lock, probably, but actual qualified help, not just thrown into the justice system, because that helps almost no one. Okay, moving on.
Right, so you saw the quotes. We quoted numerous texts, very important texts in queer theory, where queer theorists themselves will say outright that yes, there's an open debate within queer theory over the ethic, whether it's ethical, or whether pedophilia is ethical.
Okay, it's not ethical, period. Great, we agree. Just because one person wrote it in a book doesn't mean everything else they've ever said is thrown out the window. I've said before that you can't separate the art from the artist, but This is an idea. This is a concept that started maybe with the person that wrote it, but it has been reworked and reproduced by people throughout generations to actually be a very important part of our culture. We can leave the non-ethical things behind.
There's a line from Jagos where she says, "Can children," this is the actual quote, "can children be sexualized in an ethical way?"
No, they can't. Glad we agree.
That's an open question. Should we call it pedophilia?
The first noise that one's made, yeah, that's disgusting. I agree. Get on with it.
Or intergenerational sex, or man-boy love? You know, those are all very loaded terms. So she's asking, which of those should we use even to describe these affections and these orientations? So that, I know that you'll go on MSNBC and they will tell you that's scaremongering. That's just, that's just bigotry.
It is scaremongering or fearmongering, I believe would be the phrase. But interesting, though, I just thought that, okay, those things aren't moral. Those things aren't ethical, all of the titles that he just moved through. But they do exist out in our world. And that behavior, to me, is terrifying, right? People who do that out in the world are scary. Why wouldn't we want to know more about those people so we can keep everybody else safe? You know, why shouldn't there be people studying those brains and writing about them and describing them and naming them and building a framework around that dysfunction to be able to help the people with that dysfunction? Nobody wakes up in the morning thinking, I'm going to do this today. Nobody is born holding their child, looking down, thinking, I hope they turn out like that. Nobody wants that for themselves or for people that they love. But at the end of the day, it does happen. And information is power. So it's not about excusing it. It's about understanding it so we can better support everybody. Period. Everybody. Everybody deserves help. Again, this isn't me apologizing for people like that. They should be in a facility, but not jail. It shouldn't look like Orange is the New Black, thrown into wherever, left to fend for themselves. They should be getting help by clinicians. This video is taking so much longer than I thought it was, but I'm having a great time talking about this stuff because I feel the legacy of garbage thinking like this on a regular basis. So I'm happy to talk about it with you, darling.
And we want to tell you it's not scaremongering. We can give you dozens of sources that will say outright, yes, this is debated. Now, why? No, and it's not merely, why is it a slippery slope? No. Their project is the destabilization of all norms. If you can't decide what a man is anymore, you don't know what...
Yeah, so we're confusing the idea of gender identity with sexual attraction to minors, and it's not the same thing at all. As somebody who is a proponent of queer theory, I do want the deconstruction of gender. I do. I'm working on it currently. You have eyes, probably. Maybe you're listening to this. Hi, bestie, if you're folding your laundry over there, love that for you. That's what I do when I watch YouTube videos. Either that or fall asleep, but you probably can't fall asleep to me. But maybe if you are, sorry, I'll talk in a whisper tone. I don't want the deconstruction of age. That's ridiculous. That's not... Okay, let's keep going.
Woman is. Those categories are contested. They're in flux. How then can you establish this firm, black and white, sharp division between adult and child? Mm-hmm. Once you cross...
Quite simply, actually, gender and age are very different.
This threshold was 18, 16, 17 and a half, 19. Well, how can you argue that we can't tell what a woman is, but we can tell what a child is?
What?
When you're 17.99 years old, you're a child. But when you're 18.01, then you're an adult. Now, that's... They're right to say...
No, you're not. You're not really an adult. I just made it to being an adult. How old am I? I'm 28. I feel like around 25 that happened for me. It's when that prefrontal cortex grows together. I literally felt it happen. Yeah. It was painful. Growing pains, but mental.
Hey, that's more arbitrary than male and female. And they want to say it's all arbitrary. It is inevitable.
But it's contributing to this idea of the elusive they. Me, the elusive they. No. No, like, who's they? Who's they? Can we get a name? Point him out, bestie, because we probably need to send some help to those people who are saying that. I'm not saying that. You're probably not saying that. The people out here and protesting in the street are not saying that. No, they're not. These folks are banking on a lack of knowledge from people who are watching this and still haven't made a choice of like, oh, my nephew's gay, but yes, I also agree that pedophilia is wrong, so my nephew must be awful. That's not how that works. That's not how that works.
Conclusion of their own logic, which must, of course, just be rejected wholesale by Christians.
Yeah, it's funny because, oh man, so much to say on that. You see why it grinds my gears, right?
I just sat here in silence for like 40 seconds, just collecting.
No, it makes it's very interesting because here we are with this gender identity crisis, and you have...
What is the crisis, though? Do you know anybody in crisis? Do you know anybody personally in crisis, or just sensationalized cases that are all over garbage networks like Sky News Australia or Piers Morgan and that kind of nonsense?
Minors, puberty blockers, gender affirming care. It's very interesting that you mentioned the terminology because, you just change the terms and
right.
Propaganda and all of a sudden it's all okay. And I think it would be that seems obvious that would be the next step is to go for age. Because that's the...
Obvious to who? Not to me, girl. And if that's obvious to you, that might in fact say more about her. Oh, and I guess if we're talking about the church and priests, but that's kind of engaging in the same thing, right? Because we have many documented priests who have engaged in that behavior. That doesn't mean that all priests are like that, and by extension it doesn't mean that all Christians are like that either. We need to be able to separate the actions of an individual person from the community that they belong to, because that in itself is discriminatory. By looking at the shitty behavior of one person and going, oh, you're tall, so everybody else that's tall must be awful like you in this same way. It just doesn't make sense. It's not true. You should have the critical thinking skills. I say that so much on this channel, but it's true. We need the critical thinking skills to actually talk to people. Investigate. Ask questions. The human being in front of you could be awful. No matter who they are, where they come from, how tall they are, how much they weigh, what gender they are. But you have to figure that out on an individual basis. And that's hard. And that requires skill that a lot of people aren't willing or even able to acquire. So it's much easier to assign everybody to one label and just kind of toss them out because they don't understand. And it's very privileged. He was really well spoken. He might be hateful and whatever, but he's educated. We could hear it in how he was talking. Her, however, I've sounded dumb in videos before if you've been here for any amount of time. Hell, even in this video, I probably sounded dumb. It just happens. But she's not speaking very well.
Argument. Oh, but they're minors. You need parental consent to get a tattoo, but you can go get hormone blockers. And it's very interesting that naturally seems like the next step for them. And 20 years ago, had you told these same people that are advocates for this today that they would be believing that gender was fluid, they would have said, you're fear-mongering, and that's impossible. And so I'm glad you mentioned the slippery slope. I actually wrote that down to ask you about.
I'm glad you mentioned the slippery slope. Yeah, same.
So you jumped right on that.
It's not a slippery slope. Slippery slope is when you're like, if you start, eating potato chips, next thing you know, you'll be an alcoholic drunk using crack. Like, well, but why? Wait, what? Well, because they're both unhealthy. Well, there's no logical connection. But we're pointing out in the book, we showed...
So there's no connection between your gender identity and being a pedophile. So we agree again? What?
An extremely logical connection.
You're right.
Another example would be, they talk about agency, freedom.
Yep.
All these movements are liberatory, right? You want to give people agency. And we're like, amen, yes, agency. Well, what about the freedom of children to choose their sexual partners? So that's different.
He just explained a bias and then went and committed the exact same bias that he laid out. Again, I know I've done that before. But still.
Well, how? They actually have a category called adultism. Like ableism, racism, sexism, there's adultism. So when adults impose their values on children and say, "Oh, but you're innocent, you're not sexual, you don't have the agency to choose sexual partners," and they would say that's oppressive.
No, I wouldn't agree with that. I don't think that's oppressive. I think that's keeping people safe. That's not oppressive. And there is neuroscience behind that too, of like when puberty starts and when sexuality begins, and when sexuality is something that you're aware of as, I guess, a teenager, depending on when you go through puberty and stuff like that. There's science behind that. It's not some queer theorist that just wrote that down in a book 50 years ago and now it's that same exact version now. There's science behind it.
Give them the freedom to choose whether they want to be they are sexual beings. There's some really, frankly, sick stuff in the literature.
Yeah, that does sound sick. What he's describing sounds sick, but it's not the same thing as being a flamer. It's not the same thing as being feminine. It's not the same thing as being a feminine man. It's not the same thing as being gender diverse. It's not the same thing.
Our publisher made us censor a little bit of it. You can tell what's there, but it is. Yeah. And then the last thing I'll just say, Melissa, it's a whole field called queer theology, where professing Christians will apply these methods of queer theory, not just to biblical gender stuff, but just biblical theology, and they will question categories like good and evil.
Cool.
And sin and redemption, and are these even stable categories?
It is true. Yeah, absolutely. Interesting. That's cool.
They will say outright, we're taking the methods of queer theory, and of course they're all affirming, but it's more than that. They're now going beyond just being LGBTQ affirming and saying, let's start asking, there's a quote where it says we should conceive of the Trinity as a divine orgy. It is just...
That's good. That's good. Yeah, that's funny. We got 2 minutes left. Do you think we're gonna hear this one on the right say anything, or is he just there to look pretty?
Perverted.
Unreal.
I'm sorry.
Wow. Yeah, no, perverted is a very succinct way to put
Pat actually one night was reading we were up until like 4 a.m. reading queer theory literature, and he called me the next day. I just forgotten that some of this stuff is just sick. Yeah. And it's true. We had to go to...
that can be fair. Yeah, there's a lot of sick stuff out there. I'd agree.
I will say to sort of cleanse his palate. But anyway, so...
Yeah, I needed a shower afterwards.
Yeah.
Pat, that was a whole thing. I probably talked to you.
Of course his name is Pat. It makes perfect fucking sense.
For the whole time. But Pat, I want to know if you have anything to add on that topic.
Yeah, I would mention that you mentioned the use of language and how language is power, and the changing of language to soften things that historically have had perversion connected to it. We see the term minor attracted persons trying to replace words around pedophilia and pedastry and so forth.
They think saying that minor attracted person makes that more palatable, right? And it takes away the shock factor of actually saying that P word. I have said, I think minor attracted persons on my channel before, because that doesn't get picked up by the algorithm that suppresses YouTube videos, but that other P word does. I understand the concern with trying to make something that disgusting more palatable. That could be a problem. I would understand where they're coming from with that.
I think it's important for us to recognize two things. Certainly there are people that are part of the LGBTQIA+ community that think that pedophilia should be outlawed and that it is a terrible thing, that it is grossly immoral.
Okay. What was his name? I was mean to him. But we agree on that. That's nice. It's true. Most of them. Strong majority. 99%.
So we don't want to lose sight of the fact that there's people in the gay community that would say that pedophilia is a terrible thing.
Okay. Pat, I just remembered. Okay, I'm on board with Pat. I was mostly on board with him too. What are we doing here? This is so...
In saying that, we also need to reinforce what Neil said, that pedophilia And the attack on age as something constructed today as being oppressive relative to giving power to adults.
Who's doing that, though? Show us. What are the names? I'll help you take those people down. I will. I'll help you do it. We agree on almost everything that's said. I just don't. What are we doing here? Okay, be so for real with me right now. Are my eyebrows too close together? Or does that look normal? I'm really losing it. We got less than 2 minutes left. Hold on with me, bestie. We'll do it together.
And taking power away from children, this is part and parcel of the natural outworking of queer theory. This is not something that we are kind of layering onto the discipline to try to be provocative. By no means. In fact, we're trying to...
That's exactly what you're doing. It's exactly what... I couldn't have said it better myself.
Underscore what I just said. There are people in the gay community that certainly think that a pedophile should go to prison. At the same time, queer theory does in fact make a strong attempt to destabilize all norms, and that will mean opening the door to trying to legitimize and legalize sex between adults and non-adults. And
so let's talk about this in the perspective of Utah. Didn't they lower the age of consent in Utah because of all the LDS folks out there? Like, if we look at the straight traditional communities, this kind of stuff happens too. Goes back to what I was saying before earlier. There are sick people in every shape, size, color, and denomination. We need to focus on helping them and not by grouping them in with whatever communities they belong to. It's not the same thing. He explained that himself. So the time should be focused on only that and not about queer people.
And this is not scaremongering. It is part and parcel of the discipline. And so we want that balance, that we recognize that there are people in the gay community that obviously think this is evil and wrong, yet at the same time, queer theory does in fact support what we're saying here. And it is logical based upon the rubric of critical theory. It is a natural step. And then nothing is left untouched or undisturbed. And as Neil mentioned, even theology and Christian theology now will be contextualized in queer language, queer discourse, and queer ideas, and in very perverted ways, but it will be positioned as something that is a good and liberating and empowering. And it's quite disturbing.
And that's the end. All right, girliewigs, that brings us to the end of this episode of Dismantling Hate. Thank you for getting all the way to the end. This was a really long one today, but I appreciate you sticking it out with me here. If you're interested in watching more Dismantling Hate videos, you can click on the playlist that will roll on the end screen. If you want to see me paint this face, watch Dragmas Day 8 on my David They channel. I also have a podcast called Talk with David They. You can watch it on YouTube or listen to it on Spotify. And babes, remember, I'm not conservative, so my social media is not in fact on easy mode. So if you could support me in any of those ways by liking the video, subscribing to the channel, making a comment, nails emoji, I'd really appreciate you doing that because it goes a long way in supporting the work that I do here. Thanks again for joining me, and I will see you next week for another round of whatever this was. Goodbye.